So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our PDW. My name is Fabrizio Dell'Acqua. I'm a PhD student at Columbia Business School and one of the co-organizers of the PDW, together with my colleague Patrick Berkowski. The title of the workshop today is Organizations in the Age of AI, Human-Machine Interaction. We might soon be living in the age of AI. Artificial intelligence we know is a technology with revolutionary potential. It already performs a wide range of tasks with performance that is superior to that of humans, and many analysts predict they will fundamentally reshape our economies and societies. Much of the debate about AI has focused around the technical possibilities of the technology. Opinions differ on this, of course, but some researchers do believe there is a potential for an AI apocalypse. For example, Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman recently said, "I do not think that there is very much that we can do that computers will not eventually learn to do." Today, we are particularly interested in zooming on the first word in our title, organizations. And while AI is a fundamental topic for organization scholars, for management scholars, the management literature has not really provided a unified framework that studies the effect of automation on the organization and on firms. Here, we're particularly interested on how AI will impact the structure of organizations, how it will impact the extent of the division of labor between humans and machines, and how to design effective teams within organizations. We want to zoom in specifically on what happens within the boundaries of the firm, given that automation in organizations will require human-machine interactions and not machines in isolation. So when envisioning organizations of the future, Herbert Simon hypothesized that they would be a highly automated man-machine system, and the nature of management will surely be conditioned by the character of the system being managed. This has led to the current thinking about how the rise of automation will impact job specialization, task division, and team design. To have that discussion today, we have gathered a panel of 5 experts conducting research in this area. They will push us to understand what these technologies really are, how ethical arguments influence organizational adoption, and how management style mediates the effect of these technologies. And then what this all means for the organization of the future. So one point that we really want to emphasize at the beginning is that none of the organizational and societal outcomes of AI are necessarily predetermined by the technology itself. The impact of AI on work and also on society more broadly will be, at least in part, shaped by how organizations, how people inside of organizations integrate the possibilities of artificial intelligence. And so we think this makes our discussion today even more important. You're going to be involved. We have collected some of your questions in advance, and you can ask questions to the panelists throughout the workshop via the Zoom chat. Patrick and I will collect these questions and ask them to the speakers in the Q&A part of the workshop. So we'll now turn it over to Patrick, who will introduce the speakers and give a bit of an overview of the structure of the event.
Thanks, Fabrizio. Our event today features a panel of 5 distinguished speakers. First up, we have Florenta Theodoridis, an assistant professor of strategy at the Marshall School of Business at USC. Her main areas of interest are the economics of innovation, creativity, and the impact of technological advancement on business strategy, productivity, and labor markets. Next, we have Bo Calgill, an assistant professor in the strategy area at Columbia Business School. His research interests are in applied microeconomics and strategy, particularly productivity, technological innovation, organizational economics, and platforms. Third, we have Zhuming Liu, the Charles Gilliland Distinguished Chair Professor of Marketing, Professor of Strategy, and Professor of Management Information Systems at the Fox School of Business at Temple University. His research focuses on integrating artificial intelligence, big data machine learning, and field experiments to model, explain, and optimize customer behaviors and the platform economy. Fourth, we have Bruce Kogut, the Sanford C. Bernstein & Co. Professor of Leadership and Ethics at Columbia Business School. His current research focuses on governance and corporate compensation, computational social science, and developing a team's approach to studying automation. Finally, we have Rob Siemens, an associate professor at NYU Stern. His research focuses on how firms use technology in their strategic interactions with one another and on the economic consequences of AI, robotics, and other advanced technologies. We are delighted to have these speakers join us and share their thoughts on such an exciting and timely topic. The event today will proceed in two sections. The first will consist of a series of presentations by our panelists. Florenta, Bo, and Zhuming will present lightning round talks, highlighting their cutting-edge research on artificial intelligence. Bruce and Rob will then provide a synthesis of these talks and connect them to a larger discussion about human-machine interaction in the age of AI. The second part will consist of a Q&A session. We thank all the participants who submitted their questions in advance, and we're going to start this section off by asking some of these questions. We will then answer live audience questions. We are really excited to see that we have over 100 participants on this call, but before we get started, I would like to quickly go over some rules. First, given the large number of speakers on this call, please remain muted. We also encourage you to keep your camera on to allow for a more intimate discussion. Second, we have allocated time to allow for one clarifying question during each of the initial research presentations. Please type your questions directly into the chat, and Fabrizio and I will ask them to the speakers. Finally, we encourage all participants to submit questions during the Q&A session. Please type these into the chat and mention if they're directed toward a specific panelist. We will now start the research presentations. First up, we have Florenta Theodoridis, who is exploring whether machine learning is a general purpose technology using online job postings.
Awesome, thank you. Let me share my screen. I assume all good with my screen?
Yeah, that's good.
Awesome. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me. I understand I have only a few minutes, so I'll go right into it. What I wanted to talk about, this is an amazing PDW with a very important research question, or question in general, that brings up many research questions about job specialization, for example, task division, team design, ethical considerations. So those are taken from the description of the PDW. But what I wanted to do with this paper that I'm mainly going to focus on is to take a step back and understand what kind of technology AI is. Why do I think that is important? Because, at least from my perspective, I think it's important to first be able to define the problem before attempting to solve it, right? So if we're trying to understand how AI might interact with organizations, I think it's first important to understand what is AI, what kind of technology is, to have some roadmap where we might go about solving this. I think understanding the type of technology has important implications for technology investment strategy, innovation, development, organizational design, merger acquisitions, and so on. So, I mean, I'm not going to insist a lot on this. I assume many of the people in the audience are here because they have an interest in AI and they have a definition, but I'm just putting this out there with pictures and words to show the extent to which this concept of artificial intelligence might involve different other topics. And I think it becomes a bit overwhelming. Which out of these might be AI, right? We can have debates and there are definitions that may be all, maybe some, subset, and so on. But the point on this slide is to say that AI is just not one thing that one can pinpoint with ease. So where is this hype coming from that we are currently experiencing? By many accounts, the hype is coming from the development of deep learning techniques starting in 2012. I have a quote in here by what some consider to be the godfather of deep learning. Deep learning is a subsection of machine learning, and machine learning is a prediction technology. So the first insight that I want to make is that machine learning is actually a prediction technology. So knowing that, a number of individuals are assuming that machine learning is a general purpose technology. Now, this is an exciting proposition. Where is it coming from? From the fact that prediction is everywhere. So we would expect it that it will find its way into a number of different aspects of our lives. However, established general purpose technologies, there are very few, rare. The steam engine, electrification, computers, the internet. Why people are interested in general purpose technologies? Because they are important technologies. They have a long run impact on productivity and society. We can think of general purpose technologies as enabling technologies that open up new opportunities rather than offering complete final solutions. So it's important to know if machine learning is a general purpose technology, but just guessing it might not be enough. Similar to people assuming machine learning is a general purpose technology, there are plenty of papers out there that claim that many other technologies, contemporaneous and hype technologies, are general purpose, such as cloud computing, blockchain, nanotech, and so on. So is ML a GPT or not? Like I said, many studies assume so, but can we find out? Well, unfortunately, current methods rely on decades of hindsight. We usually identify GPTs after 10 or more years post this technology reaching its potential. So in this particular study, my co-authors and I assume, and rightly so I would say, that it's important to try at least to find out earlier on if machine learning is a general purpose technology or which one out of these technologies are general purpose. Why? Because general purpose technologies require specific types of strategies and investments in order to create and capture value from this technology. And important, some of these strategies could actually be harmful if the technology is not general purpose. So I'm not going to insist on the paper, you have a copy, but in a nutshell, what we are trying to do in this paper that is co-authored with Avi Goldfarb at the University of Toronto and Blady Tasca from Burning Glass Technologies, we're exploiting the Burning Glass Technologies data of job postings of more than 202 million job postings in the US up until recently, end of 2019. And why we do that is because we believe that job postings can show some insight on the spread of the technology. So for example, think of the internet. We saw the internet skills in job postings earlier on in the days of the internet, but nowadays that the internet reaches full potential, we don't see anybody asking for internet skills in job postings. So similarly, we think that we can catch machine learning and other technologies as they are scaling up. And what we find important is that we don't find evidence that machine learning by itself is a general purpose technology, but rather a cluster of technologies, mainly machine learning and data science, but also big data, NLP, and data mining. If you think about it, this makes perfect sense because machine learning is a prediction technology, but it needs a data input. It also needs an approach, data science, to be able to make sense of the output. So what are some implications for organizations? This is not an exhaustive list. It's just meant as food for thought. So first of all, which technology should we be focusing on when we say the impact of AI on organizations? We suggest not just ML, but a cluster of technologies. Is the transformative impact of GPTs guaranteed? Absolutely not. As it was said already, organizations and individuals have and should have a role in shaping the evolution of technologies. I'm highlighting a paper and work by Asimoglu and Restrepo that talk about automating ML that they call a so-so technology that generates little increase in productivity beyond human labor displacement that might not necessarily achieve the high benefits that we might expect from a GPT. So we should be careful not to go in that direction. To create value from GPTs, organizations need to engage in coordinated innovation. This is extremely important, knowing that this technology is general purpose or has a chance to be general purpose. Coordinated innovation is extremely important to achieve the benefits from this technology. So that implies investing in R&D capabilities, collaborating with academia, alliances, with all sorts of firms, including competitors. It's important to understand that if the technology is not GPT, such broad investments in coordinated innovation might be harmful. To capture value from GPTs, again, an example, complementary assets are really important. I'm highlighting a couple of papers in there. And one of mine as well that talks about decision-making skills being complementary to the machine learning and how we might want to go about improving decision-making skills. And last, if the technology is general purpose, as our paper shows, creating and capturing value from the technology requires strong financial capabilities. This coordinated innovation is expected to run for a long period of time, and it requires top management buy-in. So those are really important. The dedicated financial resources not evaluated using the day-to-day operations. And management buy-in, I'm highlighting again another paper that Avi, Blady, and I have about adoption of machine learning in healthcare, showing that adoption in healthcare is lagging because decision makers fear displacement, right? So I hope this provides some food for thought as we are moving forward. I have very little time and I already went over a few seconds, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Florenta. We have a clarifying question, so maybe if you can address it briefly by GLA, asking, is the conclusion that ML, NLP, etc. are all GPTs?
The conclusion that we draw in the paper, which is in the spirit of research, researchers are rarely making definitive statements, is that out of all the technologies that we are comparing, which is as complete as we can set of hype and emerging technologies that we are observing, machine learning and the other ones that I mentioned have the highest probability of being general purpose.
Cool, thank you. Next up, we have Bo Cowgill, who will present on how ethical arguments affect AI adoption in business.
Thank you so much. This is a great PDW. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me and putting this all together. You know, everyone here has probably seen that the kind of ethical aspects of AI have become kind of much more front and center in the last couple of years. Here's one particularly influential article on this topic that deals with the adoption of predictive algorithms within the criminal justice system. You know, alleging that that recidivism algorithms used in sentencing and bail setting were biased against Black defendants. So this has spawned a whole new research literature in computer science that mostly consists of theoretical computer science research. So the proofs of the optimality of some fairness property from some algorithm. And what my co-authors and I in this series of papers think are missing are links to management and personnel practices. And what we think that this topic would benefit from is a kind of realization that most bias code is made by human beings who are sitting inside organizations and who are subject to organizational forces like everyone else. So incentives, culture, media, kind of activism, shareholder pressure, and things like this, okay? So in other words, bias code, it's not purely a CS theory problem, it's also a management, personnel, and incentives problem. Okay? So this perspective, what it means for research is there's a need for empirical papers about AI production and adoption by businesses. And ideally, this would feature sort of experimental variation in management practices and pressures, and then some kind of sort of clear outcome metric of success and failure. Okay? And then we would sort of causally link these practices to the presence or absence of bias that would hopefully help us more deeply understand why biased algorithms are produced to begin with and what managers and policymakers could do to thwart them. Okay? So I'm going to briefly talk about two papers today. The first is called Biased Programmers or Biased Data. It's a field experiment on AI engineers and operationalizing AI ethics. And then what I'll spend a little bit more time on is the managerial effects of algorithmic fairness activism, which is not something I'd presented at AOM before. This is part of why I'm spending more time on this, okay? Let me start with biased programmers or biased data. So this is a more ambitious of the two papers. in this experiment, we hired 400 AI engineers under 4 experimental conditions to all build an algorithm with the same goal, which is to try to predict performance on a standardized math test using administrative data. And the administrative data contained over 5,000 covariates per person. And they could use whatever engineering approach that they to try to do these predictions. Okay? And then once these 400 engineers built their algorithms, we tested each of them on a test set of 20,000 observations, not in their training set. So we had a total of 8 million algorithmic predictions of math ability or math skill that were developed under 4 different experimental conditions. Okay? So I'll just quickly go over these results. First of all, we find that better data quality is the most effective intervention, but for reducing bias. But we find this for some unexpected reasons, which is that there's this complementarity between data and incentives and effort. So the punchline of this is that giving engineers better data not only increases algorithmic quality per hour of programmer effort, but it also increases overall hours worked, okay? And we can get into some of the kind of theoretical reasons for that in the paper. But I won't go into this in great detail here. Basically, a greater marginal benefit for an extra hour of work if you have good data. Okay? We find that basic reminders and technical advice, reminders work okay. Technical advice actually seems like it backfired. But the other kind of big thing I want to share is that greater workforce diversity seems to help, but not for the obvious reason. And so the obvious reason would be that, algorithms developed by the female and minority programmers were possibly more or less biased on their own. That actually does not seem to be true. But what we do find is that prediction errors are correlated within demographic groups. Okay? So essentially, all the men are making the same sorts of mistakes and women are making different mistakes, and that there are different types of mistakes in the prediction errors being done by different demographic groups. So averaging across these groups in a diverse team kind of improves the quality of the algorithms. So this is kind of, it's not that the diversity, that the female and minorities write less biased code. It's just that, the errors are uncorrelated so that there's a benefit from averaging. Okay, so in my brief remaining time, I want to tell you about this second paper about the managerial effects of algorithmic fairness optimism. Okay? There are 2 main motivations for us writing this paper. The bigger research question here is, how do managers and business executives react to ethical arguments about AI adoption? Okay? So the first motivation is we've seen lots of concern about scientific veneer as a vector for AI bias. This is a letter to the EEOC from Senator Kamala Harris, talking about how AI could provide a scientific veneer of objectivity, but ends up, just codifying bias. But there's almost no research that establishes that this scientific veneer thing even exists. The second observation is that, my co-author and I noticed that when managers, in most businesses face unethical challenges with AI, they tend to kill the project rather than to settle the ethical issue. Okay, and then the process reverts back to its sort of pre-AI state, which sometimes involves subjective human decisions, and where there's still ethical issues, but they're now a bit more opaque because they're not explicitly written down in code. Okay? So we did an experiment. This was a survey of 4,000 business managers identified on Prolific, and we asked them about adopting AI in different settings. And here's what we found. So, since I'm kind of running out of time. First of all, we found that scientific veneer is indeed effective. So we manufactured an intervention that would sort of add, symbols of scientific authority, no content, but made an argument feel more scientific. And this was effective at changing adoption decisions. But this scientific veneer was not more effective for pro-AI arguments as opposed to anti-AI arguments. So the anti-AI arguments with scientific veneer were basically just as effective. Okay? And on our second result, our second study, we had subjects read op-eds about AI ethics. And we found that reading any AI ethics op-ed increased the likelihood that the subject would want to just kill the AI in the organization and replace it with whatever their status quo process was, or what they had beforehand, rather than investing in somehow fixing it. And these results seem to be driven by changed beliefs coming through the op-eds about what the PR or legal implications of adopting it are. Okay? So just to summarize, the findings in the second study validate the concern, I think, that scientific veneer affects adoption. But we also see that criticism of AI, benefits from the halo of scientific authority and, just as much as advocacy. And in the second one, it raises this question of what is the goal of AI fairness activism? Do we want to encourage business people to fix the AI or adopt it? And it looks as if the legal and PR considerations around AI ethics end up being a pro-status quo force that encourages managers to keep doing what they're doing rather than use AI in a way that could possibly fix it. Thank you. I'm sorry for going over.
Thank you, Bo. Maybe if you can address briefly a clarifying question by Rodrigo and also Miriam. How do you define better quality data in the first paper?
The better quality data. Some of the programmers were given a perfectly representative training sample so that the test sample and the training sample were drawn from the same distribution. And then the programmers who got lower quality data had a biased subsample. So when firms try to build resume screening algorithms, a lot of times they have this biased subsample issue, which is that they only have performance data for the workers that they hired. So we did, we gave people training data in the low quality data intervention, where they, that featured this sample selection issue. It's basically how it works.
Thank you. So now our final research presentation by Xiuming Luo. He will explore whether AI technologies complement or substitute for human managers in creating greater value for organizations.
All right, you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, good. Thank you for the organizer. And my name is Xiuming Lu. So I'm a little bit unique to the panel here because I will come from a marketing perspective, how the AI technology interacted with customers. But also we deal with some issues with AI and employee interface. So in this research, we ask a simple question. Do AI technologies complement or substitute managers? So it's a field experiment. Before I go into detail of the experiment, I would like to give a quick overview of the big picture, how the AI technologies, for example, chatbot, they can work as employees. So once the AI chatbots trained by call center data, that's our context, or call centers and fintech industry, and they deal with voice recognition, deep learning algorithms, so then they can work as agent to serve customers. So traditionally, we know that call centers use not employees to serve customers, call customers, deal with Q&A. But unlike these agents, the chatbot is a bot, is a machine. They can talk to customers as if it's human agents. What's the benefits of that? They can work for 24/7, no fatigue, no drama, smile to customers for the whole day. That's not a problem. In addition, the same AI technology, they can work as a supervisor. We call it AI boss. They can coach employees. So traditionally, we have human boss. They're trying to coach the rookies, new hires to the company. Hopefully, they're very patient. Nowadays, companies can use this AI software to help train and coach the employees in real time. For example, the company MetLife, they use AI platform, they call it Kagito. So they use this computer software to coach employees in real time when the employee's sound is too tired. And then this computer going to show, hey, there's a coffee here, coffee sign to show energy up. And if the customer complaining, the algorithm automatically going to show a heart sign over here to say, remind the employee, you have to be more empathetic to the customer's situation because the customers are whining and complaining. So I would like to give you a simple figure. In my view, what would be the exciting opportunities for strategy and management scholars in the era of AI. If you look at the x-axis, we start with a journey by testing how AI going to replace or assist workers, so that's employees. And then we go to the domain of the supervisors, managers, and they may be threatened or be assisted by AI as well. So for example, our first paper would deal with AI disclosure, was in last year, marketing science. So then in a nutshell, that project was trying to deal with a phenomenon with disclosure. So what we found that is the AI technology works. So they can become a frontline employees to serve the customer in outbound call, and the customer make a purchase actually from that telemarketing call. However, if there's a disclosure in the statement such as, hey, I'm a chatbot from company XYZ to serve you as our VIP customer, and then that disclosure, the machine identity can do reduce the customer purchase by 80%. So one implication that that project is indeed AI might replace workers, but not in near time. In the near future, because the customers push back once they know it's AI machine to help them. So we go to the next up, we're going to AI assistant workers. If we not replace all the workers, why not let the AI help the workers? So we have another project about the AI coaching. We find the heterogeneous effects of AI in helping the underdogs or the top workers. And in a similar kind of paradigm, we can move up to how AI replaces managers. So in another project, we find that AI could become a boss. Boss, the meaning supervising the employees, the subordinates. We find that the employees is kind of a love and hate relationship in dealing with the AI boss vis-a-vis human boss. So in this project, it's more about this domain, how AI is going to help managers. So we deal with the heterogeneous effects about transformational leadership versus transactional leadership, which one benefited more from the AI assistance. So it would be a very exciting journey. I think there are many opportunities to come, how to apply AI for the strategy and the management fields. So in this study in particular, we randomly assigned 424 employees to be supervised by 5 type of managers. So that's my x-axis. So the first condition would be the boss, AI boss condition. So this is the AI technology to give feedback to the employees, like yesterday, how they work, and how many mistakes you made when you serve the customers. So they're all frontline employees. Second condition, transaction managers. So these managers are typical human boss, but he would emphasize on the transactional skills, improve the job skills, that's it. Transformational managers will be third condition. This means this manager play a really strategic emphasis on building relationship with the employee, so gain their trust, etc. The fourth condition is we now let the AI assist the first type of manager, transaction manager. And the final condition would be transformational manager assisted by the AI. So the y-axis is the performance of these employees' performance. This experiment for a whole month. This is average performance for that 30 days. So you can see the AI boss actually is quite good. So they outperform transformation manager itself. That makes sense because the bot was trained with huge data. So they know the correct answers, wrong answers, etc. So they do a good job in coaching the employees. So what's interesting is, according to our hypothesis, we believe that this AI bot technology should help transaction managers. So indeed, we compare transaction manager only with this transaction manager assistant bot that have improvement. The interesting thing is the transformational manager benefits more, way more. You can see the gap between bar number 3 and bar number 5 is way bigger than the gap between 2 and 4. So that's conclusion. Our conclusion would be transformation managers assisted by bot will be the best condition for the company to adopt in order to help the employee to boost their job performance. And the transaction manager, if you look at this bar and the first bar is a similar height, means the transaction manager is still at risk to be replaced by this AI technology. So the final slide would be why. What's the mechanism? So we find that when transformation managers, they can build stronger interpersonal relationship with the employees to garner more trust and respect from the employee. That will induce the employees to learn more from this AI supervising activity during the experiment month. That's why the performance jumped. On the other hand, transactional type of leadership, when they assisted by the AI bot, they improve a little bit, but not statistically significant. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I will now turn it over to Rob and Bruce. They will provide a synthesis of these talks and connect them to a larger discussion about human-machine interaction in the age of AI. Thanks.
I think Rob was going to start, and I think he's doing the ones by Bo, and I'm doing the other two. Rob, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
All right, thanks, Bruce. So first of all, Fabrizio, thank you, and Patrick, thank you very much for inviting Bruce and I to be part of this fantastic panel. It's great to see everybody. It's great to sort of partake in AOM a week after AOM has officially ended. But I look forward to seeing everybody in person, hopefully next year, or roughly around the same time. So we just heard 3 fantastic papers, or 4 rather, I guess, Bo, if we count 2 of yours. So fantastic papers. And the audience probably doesn't need to be told this, but the 3 people that you just heard from and their co-authors on these papers are really like the leading researchers in this area of how AI is affecting managers, firms, strategy, organizations. And so it's just wonderful for me to be part of this. Now, I'm going to perhaps spring something a little bit on Bruce that we didn't talk about yesterday. But I hope that's okay, Bruce. Don't worry, I'm not calling on you. I'm just going to engage in a little bit of naked self-promotion here, okay? I hope that's okay.
Rob, when you say naked, you're welcome to do whatever you want, Rob.
Thanks, Bruce. A PhD student that I work pretty closely with, his name is Manav Raj. So Manav and I last year wrote something for a journal called Journal of Organization Design. And this journal does something that's pretty interesting. They put out these research primers. And so if you're not familiar with the journal, take a look at it. There's sort of research primers on corporate strategy, research primers on any sort of type of AOM type topic you could imagine, organization type topic you could imagine. They put out sort of a research primer on these. And so they asked us to do a primer on AI and robots, right? Who wouldn't want to do something like that? And so what the primer does is, first we sort of provides some definitions, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, and then reviews some of the existing literature. And again, this is a very nascent area, so of course there isn't much, but I believe we touch on all of the authors who you've heard from today. And then we end with a series of questions that we think are important for our field. And so that's what I want to direct your attention to here quickly. It's right towards the bottom. Excuse the sort of rapid scroll here. And I want to direct you to this article, which I believe Fabrizio has maybe provided already in a folder. And then within the article, I want to direct you to these questions, and in particular to the first of these. Which types of firms are more likely to adopt AI and robot technologies? Are there certain management styles and organizational forms that may be particularly quick to adopt? Are there market level forces that impact the adoption decision? Okay, and there are a few others here. You can see our list of what we think are sort of important questions for those of us in the field to be thinking about. Now, what I really like about the papers that we heard from today is they are really zooming in on this first question that we have around, sort of management, sort of organizational level issues, right? So things like management styles, the way a message that a manager wants to make is communicated to an employee. All of these things, of course, can affect the adoption and use of these technologies. And I think that that's sort of a unique perspective that those of us in management bring to this broader discussion, right? And sort of, it's sort of a unique thing that we bring to the discussion together with economists and sociologists, ethicists, and others who are studying this. Okay, let me stop the screen share there. Let me now sort of say a couple of specific things about Beau's paper. So the first thing to note is that, and I'm mostly going to talk about the second of the two papers that he, actually I'm only going to talk about the second of the two papers that he talked about. So the first thing to note is that, Beau really is an expert in this field around, really pushing us to think about what it is that we're talking about when we talk about bias. So Beau touched on this a little bit. He said that, for the most part, it's computer scientists that have been talking about this. And that's true. It's sort of computer scientists, ethicists, and legal scholars, sort of, you imagine that little Venn diagram, and it's those folks right in the middle that have been talking about this. And economists, sort of mainstream economists have not touched on it at all. And in our field, frankly, it's Beau who's been leading the way on this. And so he is the expert in this area, along with, several of the co-authors that he's working with on this. Now, what Beau is bringing to this that I really like is this, it's really empirically driven, which I think is important. Some people might not like that approach. They might like that you lead with theory, then the empirics follow. I completely disagree with this. That's a new, right? This is a new phenomenon. Let's get some basic empirical facts out there. And so I think Beau's approach is the right approach. Let's try to understand what's happening. And I might expound on that a little bit more, Bruce, perhaps with you a little bit later when we talk about directions for the field and things like that. But I won't say more on that right now, but I think Beau's approach is the right approach. I particularly like in that second paper that Beau presented, this focus on the scientific veneer. That's new. I haven't seen anybody try to rigorously push on this. I don't want to get too political here, but perhaps it's because we're in the middle of a very important presidential election that I'm thinking a lot about the value of science, but I think it's also important to think about perhaps, let's say, like heterogeneous effects around how people interpret a message that has this scientific veneer on it. And so Beau, I think, is adding to that conversation as well. And I'd like to see, hopefully there's some follow-on papers on this around this sort of, this point about scientific veneer. Like one little nitpicky thing, and then I'll stop and hand it over to Bruce. The intervention that you use, as I understand it from the appendix in the paper, it struck me as a fairly subtle intervention. Really it came down to this difference between, did you get a PhD in sociology or a PhD in physics? Beau, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that's really where the intervention was. And that someone sort of relatively quickly reading through, the respondent who's reading through that's a subtle little intervention there. And just the fact that it's a PhD might overwhelm the fact that it's in sociology or or in physics. And so I would just push you on that piece a little bit. All right, I'll stop. And I don't, Bruce, actually, is it okay if Bo just quickly responds to that, and then we could hand it over to you?
I'm not the dictator here. We have, so I'll turn it over to
Yes.
others to run it.
How about I reply in the Q&A section, because I could just put that appendix up and we can see it.
Yeah, sounds good. Over to you, Bruce.
Okay, that was great, Rob. Yeah, that was fine for naked truth, Rob. That was slight panic on my side, but you because you are down in the village, we're up here in more tidy, proper Upper West Side. So, I got a little thrill there. Look, we are. I'm looking at two papers which was assigned to me, and they're really interesting papers. One of them comes out, I'd say, of a dialogue which has been happening in a series of conferences over in Toronto, but not only in Toronto as well, but also in NBR and elsewhere, which I hear back from. And it's interesting to hear that particular debate. I'd say it's kind of within that community, which Florenta is relating back to her thinking. And then I also like very much the paper which Xuming and Nan and others worked on, because it was really interesting to see them do a little bit of experimentation around organizational types, which was also one of the words in the title for this PDW, which Fabrizio and Patrick so greatly pulled together for us. So if I have time, I want to say something about organizations, and I would like to say something about kind of context, business and society, taking Fabrizio's opening quote from Simon, which is always a good thing to do, about the particular characteristics of the context in which we do these studies. So what I liked a lot about the study, which was given to us by Florenta, was that it was really amazing data. Burning glass data, fun title of a HR data set, and looking at basically this problem of the general purpose technologies. This is, I would say, is a discussion which started off in the 90s, and she cites the people Bresnahan and Trachtenberg, and then Paul David was always hanging around, and then it's kind of back in fashion with AI on it. We don't have much time, but I will endorse what Rob said about the organization design as being a really interesting way to see these problems right now, and particularly because some of this approach came up through Steve Eppinger, Carlos Baldwin, and I can tell you some other things later too about statistical approaches to this issue, because you have this beautiful matrix of N by N, trying to show where the various things overlap with each other, and that's a great design problem. But it also was a way to work out for classification. Now I just stress this because one way to understand what AI might be is it's a classification system. It classifies things really well, and I think that's important. And the other thing, of course, which AI does very well is it provides a generative model. So sometimes I leave this for you to think about. I just kind of wonder whether or not we can maybe cut to the chase a little bit on this stuff and just take a look at the math which these models actually approaches use, and just say how many of them are using a generative model of a Bayesian sort, which we've seen in 3 other kinds of applications, and how many are actually distinctive from each other. And my money is probably more commonality among them than other ones. To me, what AI is learning from data, and I think that's really important. And I think it comes back to what Xuming was talking about earlier, which is important to us. So at the end of the day, the quest for the general purpose technology maybe still leaves us a little hungry. There's lots of things which get acquired and adopted and diffused, which is important. And I think there's something there to it. I think it's interesting to try to put machine learning in the forefront of the whole thing, despite my kind of doubts that there may be more an underlying root to all these things. But my recollection of Bresnahan and Trachtenberg, and I've not read it recently, I've talked to folks who at this conference about that, is that it's really a second derivative argument. It's really how the innovations, in a sense, also enhance the ability to innovate. And this was the learning to learn issues, which Stiglitz and other people also at that time were trying to model. And I think on that issue, it's still pretty much an open deck. I would guess there's a lot of things to it, but I would suggest that maybe they go back to that issues of just a GPT is it's around everywhere, as opposed to and it's really increasing the rate of innovation as well. On the Shuming article, I thought that was really brilliant. He did such a good job explaining it. I won't add that much more to it. I will say that what I liked a lot about it was it was really a marketing kind of paper, because you got these two types, the transactional type and the transformational type, and they are there's only two managers in the data set, which they tell us transparently. And the transformational person comes out looking really good, social skills, citation to Deming, that this is what really matters, because after all, we're not going to be able to beat machines in terms of raw calculations. We knew that back in Simon's day, that we've lost that particular battle. But on the other hand, what we do find is a transactional leader who still maybe can't get over it. I thought they're a little bit unfair there. And I think this goes back to the issues of the characteristics of the problem. Maybe, it's what they're looking at in terms of this amazing Chinese company, the amazing data, which they also got from there. But it does seem to me that the transactional leader is really good for certain kinds of organizations, particularly ones which are very transactional. And you would think that that's where incentives matter. And there was no differences in incentives, because it's all within the same corporation, between whether it's transformational or transactional. But you can imagine a high-powered organization, heavily incentivized, with a transactional manager doing very well. You probably have to leave that particular organization to do that, because organizations themselves have characteristics to them, a culture to them, which is not going to give you the sufficient variance to actually do that particular analysis. Not trying to be negative. I think it's great. For some reason my screen has disappeared. I'm not sure if you guys are still around. Rob, can you say something to me so I just know you're there?
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, it took me a moment.
Okay, good. Right, so it's voice active. That's good. So I just want to finish real quickly on this thing about business society, and I'm not going to save Bo from the possible implications of that talk on that. But ethics is there's a third rail to ethics, and it really came up pretty clear with that issues that people, when they get close to it, instinctively say, "Hey, I'm just not going to do it. Screw AI. I'm just going to go back to before." So I think that strikes me as extremely wise, intuition and how to handle these things, because there's going to be a lot of things coming out of a purely data approach, which are going to be offensive to certain people's sensibility. And Vanessa Burbano's got this great paper to show that on activism, she finds that some people get pissed off over what the other employees are doing because they don't agree with them. Think about something like abortion, which comes up. You're going to find people disagreeing on that. No amount of data is going to settle that particular issue. Whether all people should be equally paid, or whether what should be that should be proportional pay to hiring to the numbers of people in your race, and that becomes the classification thing. So there's lots of things happening which have to do with society and business, which is not going to be easily addressed by an algorithmic approach, and you need to have something around that and be sensitive to it. And I think we can actually do work on that. So, I will not get too European to you, but I do think that this sort of Habermasian, organizations where you got public debate, where you reveal your priorities over time, is probably a good thing to consider. But after all, firms are hierarchical. They have boards, which Bo mentioned, and all this stuff actually matters. So they're not in the business really of creating a public forum for truth seeking. They're out there also as organizations to earn a return, among other things, which they actually try to achieve. But I do caution us that business and society is not an algorithm. It's context. It's what Simon was referring to, the characteristics of the organization and the place. But I think that has to be kept in mind. And I bet we come to that during the question and answer period as well. Okay. 2 great papers. I was really happy to read them. Thanks, Patrick and Fabrizio, for asking me to do that.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you for the comments. We'll now move on to the Q&A part of the session. We will start with some questions that you submitted in advance, but please feel free to ask questions in the live chat on Zoom. We're checking them, and we'll alternate between the questions submitted and in advance and the questions submitted now. So let me start. So first question, management scholars use a variety of theories to understand organizational phenomena. What organizational theories do you think are the most relevant for understanding AI in organizations? And we have Florenta and Shuming as suggested answers, but please feel free to jump in if you want to say something. We'll try to keep each answer total at about 4 or 5 minutes.
Shuming, you can go ahead.
Okay, I thought, okay, I'll go after you.
Either way, it's fine by me.
Okay, why don't you go first? Because I'm the marketing guy, right?
Oh yeah, true. Yes, so we need to make it, yes, that Nan was, I guess, management, and that's why I signed. Okay, so my take on this, and by no means I'm an expert in organizational theories, because as you heard from my profile, I do mostly innovation, and I am in management and strategy for sure. But my take on this would be in line with what Rob said earlier. It's a new phenomena. Rather than trying to go through theories and picking through theories, which one is the most appropriate and so on, I think it's most important to try to understand the phenomena. I'm going to link back to what I said in my very short presentation. AI is a new technology, but it's not really. I mean, there are some parts of it that are new, some are not. AI was not invented yesterday. You saw the definition of AI is quite nuanced. There has been work on AI since the 50s. So it is important to understand what this technology is. That's above and beyond GPT, what you saw in my paper, but in general, to try to understand what does this technology do? Is it good at revealing patterns? Is it good at revealing categories? Can it include decision-making or not, etc.? There are a number of debates on this. So what is it similar about what we call AI with other technologies? And I assure you there are a number of similar things. And once we identify those, then we can go to theories that know how to deal with those parts that are similar with technologies or phenomena that us as management scholars had to undertake and understand in other contexts. And what is different about AI? Maybe there's something new, right? And maybe for those, first understanding the phenomena is important, and then adjusting the existing theories is also important. And furthermore, the last that I want to draw attention to, or let me just give you some examples. Like, for example, I highlighted in my paper collaboration with academia. There's a lot of literature about industry academia collaboration and what are the issues with that and what are the advantages with that, right? There's a lot in the literature about alliances for innovation. What are the problems with those or not? There's a lot in the literature in TCE, for example, about complementary assets and so on. So I highlighted some of those, right? Those are components of AI. And I think what will be super interesting is to understand interactions between these various components. Once we have to understand collaboration with academia plus alliances with competitors. Do we have any example from before about that and how we should go about it? Do we need to amend existing theories, or can we lean on some existing theories for that? So in other words, I would say that all theories matter. It's just a matter of understanding what this technology is all about, and then going for inspiration in the various theories and being open to exploring phenomena, like Rob said, and not just being stuck on, I have to lead with theory. and also being open to building on existing theories.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with Florenta. But I want to add a couple of points. I think in terms of the old theory, I believe old is gold. So in that sense, the literature is huge in terms of all kinds of organizational theory at the individual employee level or top management level or leadership style levels, right? Sort of ample of ammunitions for like young scholars, PhD students to fall back on. I think that's good, but also there's an opportunity to create or new theories. For a simple example, so this dynamic capability, right? RPV, DC, all these things are huge influence among management scholars. But if you think about the AI, fundamentally different it is, as Bruce was saying, they're data hungry and the algorithm tune up. So as deep learning, all these algorithms come in, so they give us a new angle to look at the traditional theory or the boundary condition is, what's the local edge treatment effects, should we, if we can debias that machine, for example, the Bose presentation, right? So if humans were hardwired by all kinds of biases, heuristics, but machines have a good opportunity to debias pretty quickly compared to human beings. So there's many boundary conditions we can do, especially for some of the projects we're doing like employee level. We infer when we do employee like interface with AI, we randomize customers, right? When we do AI versus managers, we randomize employees. So then that's give you two layer of opportunities to apply existing theories or challenging the existing theories. So for example, we find that O theory, organization learning, is still critical. No matter what AI is doing, they have to empower employees to learn better, learn the job skill better. In a good organizational culture where people trust those AI machine feedback, whatever they do in the good hardcore data analytics, if they learn from that, then that would be better job performance. If they fail to learn it, despite the advanced technology, they're not doing that well. And also there could be another scenario where your investment in AI technology is fancy but backfire. When the workflow, when the AI, when they trying to assist the managers or the employees, but they may end up with better results. When the workflow design of that assemblage between the AI and humans wrong. So we have other applications of those situations. So I think in summary, in brief, I think there's plenty of opportunities for all kinds of organizational theory to find a home, a sweet home in this new area. And the classical theory is always also very important for extending this new frontier of AI technology.
Thank you. Let's move to the second question that we received. So there have been various estimates of the number of jobs likely to be impacted by automation, leading some to fear a robot apocalypse. However, many of these views treat humans as passive adopters of this technology. What are some of the strategic responses that humans may have when interacting with automated agents? And we have
why don't you start?
and Rob. Yeah.
Sure. So I have a paper that's a little bit about this. It's about strategic adoption decisions by humans who, who are faced with possible replacement or attempts to at least, augment, human decision making. I'll just put this link in the, in the chat for everyone. So this is called Algorithmic Social Engineering. It's with Megan Stevenson. And it's a formal applied game theory paper, but it has some kind of intuitive implications. And the topic here is what you might call AI advisors, or broadly applications where the goal of the AI is not to override human decision makers, but to influence them in some way, or to provide or to be a an assistant of sorts, okay? And they may be trying to influence or manipulate human decision makers, possibly good, possibly for evil, or possibly in the interest of the person, doing the human's interest, or possibly in somebody else's interest, okay? So the punchline of this paper is that, the effectiveness of these AI advisors, at least at changing decision-making, depends on exactly what the algorithm is providing. And in particular, the algorithm could be providing objective information about the state of the world, or it could be providing normative suggestions that incorporate some sort of, objective function, defined by the programmer of the algorithm. Okay. And what you can show, I think, pretty easily is that, when there is when the AI algorithm is not just providing, objective information about the state of the world, but also some sort of, normative spin on it, then it's rational for the human decision maker to Bayes update less, based on the knowledge that they're probably trying to be manipulated. And so the implication is that, if you want to change human decision makers and their decisions, it's probably more effective to change their incentives than to feed them, propaganda cloaked as information, or something that's posing to be information but has, normative content, possibly in subtle ways, but in ways that that the human decision could find out. More generally, the distinction between preferences and objectives in algorithms seems like it's really important, and it's another thing where social scientists have something, I think, to contribute back to computer science. Most algorithms incorporate some sort of objective function, but also some sort of prediction function, and these could play completely different roles within an organization. They arguably, if you're thinking about a software company, should be managed by different, different groups, and probably should be regulated differently too.
Thanks, Bo. I'm going to make two quick comments. So comment number one is about the term robot apocalypse. There's not going to be any type of apocalypse. Let's demystify this stuff a little bit. We use the terms artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's nothing intelligent here. There's no learning happening. This is just software. Pretty stupid. I mean, it's sophisticated software. I don't totally understand how it works, but that doesn't mean that it's going to take over the world. It does this software, and I use that term very intentionally to demystify what we're talking about here. It does really, really well at the very specific task that we give it. Again, I don't totally understand how it does what it does. I also don't understand how my car works. I don't understand how my iPhone works. I don't understand how Zoom works. That doesn't mean I can't use these all really, really effectively. Okay, we're just talking about software. It's not going to take over the world. Okay, that's point one. Point two is, so as I said earlier, I really like this approach of sort of, of leading with empirics, right? And so we heard 3 empirical papers. The papers that you heard today are all very quantitative in nature, hundreds, if not thousands of observations. I just want to point out that we can also learn a lot from qualitative data, specifically to this question that the organizers are asking us. So in particular about what are some responses that humans might have when interacting with automated agents. There's a great paper by someone named Matthew Bean. He's a professor at UC Santa Barbara. And he studies the adoption of, basically like robotic surgery in hospitals and the effects that this has on the doctors that are already there as well as the interns. And it has very different effects. I'll lead you all to read the paper in the interest of time and the fact that I'm not Matt Bean. I'm not going to describe the whole paper. But as you might imagine, one of the big issues for the interns is they're entering this new world where there's all this robotic surgery happening, and they don't have the benefit of all the pre-existing knowledge about sort of how the body works and what is where in the body and things like that, right? All this sort of tacit knowledge that the existing doctors, surgeons already have. And so what these interns do is they come up with really clever ways of gaining that knowledge, right? Sort of working around the system that's been put in place to gain the knowledge that they need to have. And so I think that I think that might be a useful angle to push a little bit. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thanks also for reassuring us on the apocalypse not to come. We can maybe now move to one question from the chat. So I see from Deepak, from a methodological perspective, it seems that experiments are the way to go for studying AI in organizations. Can the panelists address the pros and cons in terms of translating experimental research on AI to practice? I'm thinking about the recent increasing emphasis on impact. So, any of the panelists?
Okay, I can give a quick answer to that question. So maybe some people are pessimistic in answer to this question because industry have more data than academic, have faster, newer algorithm, computer science circle. Look at the big tech companies, right? Facebook, Google, Amazon. Those are really the platform where you use a lot of AI and machine learning. But I think we should be, as academia, we should be really the other way around, should be optimistic. Why? Because we have theory, we can guide the industry. So that's why we run some RCT with some industry companies. Actually, we mutually learn from each other in many different ways. I can give you a simple example. We can give them a lot of theory guidance. The industry, when they testing all this stuff, A/B testing, they have the platform, they can do it, but they don't have a good prediction in theory, why it work, how it work, what's the underlying mechanism. So one concrete example was when the industry people are excited about hybrid, assemblage between AI and the human workers. We tell them the good story, and then they finally adopt it. We're trying to help them avoid a backfiring case where when they implement the AI as a supervisor and they're trying to design a workflow, we advise them to not disclose to the employee in the beginning. Because the literature, OB literature and you include both paper about the bias, right? The employee pushback against this fancy algorithm, because we do not know the procedure justice. We don't know what's the normative or the many other aspects of the algorithm. Why should I trust that? So what we did is ask the company, say, in the beginning, you use the AI to help the employees as if it's come from a human manager. And that we call it shadow AI workflow and work the best. And once they habituate to that good feedback, good information from AI, then they can disclose to employees and reap all the benefits from AI investment. So in a very brief is, we have theory, we have good guidance for the industry when we work together as a win-win situation.
Thank you. Anyone who wants to add to that?
Maybe if I can add like a very pragmatic, high level. The question of what's most appropriate for this, I don't see why we need to pick and choose, right? Experiments are excellent. Causal inference from historical data is awesome. The trade-off is, as usual, internal versus external validity. We are dealing with the recent phenomena. Maybe there is not enough post data for a quasi-experimental design to say something. There's not enough observational data to say something meaningful in terms of causal inference, but that does not mean we need to eliminate quasi-natural experiments. It doesn't mean we need to limit experimental design either. It means the two are complementary. And adding to that, there's a third approach, right? We can do prediction, which, yeah, is not very popular among management scholars. We tend to either do correlations or try to go to causal inference and not as much of a prediction. But maybe with the new phenomena, it's interesting to even try prediction. Even correlations are informative if done carefully and interpreted carefully through theory. So I think it's more of a question of trying to pair the research question that one is interested in with the best research design, rather than trying to rule on which one is the method for this phenomena.
That was great, Florenta. That was a very well said and put.
So yeah, I think we have time possibly for a couple of other questions. So maybe let's have another one that was sent in advance, and then we'll get another one from the audience live. So trust and corporate culture are essential components of modern day organizations, helping to facilitate decentralization and division of labor within firms. How will trust and culture impact AI adoption, and how will the introduction of automated agents change the culture of organizations? And we had Bruce and Shuming on this one, but again, feel free to jump in.
Shuming, you want to go ahead?
You can go ahead if you have, something in your mind. Otherwise, I can go. That's fine.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question, and I want to see if I can just, get to the point by just also referring back again to the paper by Nan and Shuming, which is truly an organizational study dealing with, two kinds of leaders and how that actually matters. And of course, the choices of transactional versus transformational is probably also going to be a cultural aspect as well. But you also asked the question about trust. We are completing now, I say we, it's with Patrick Pekowski and with Fabrizio Dell'Acqua, a kind of fun study on working with Mario. I think it was an excuse for Patrick to play more video games, but it worked out for everyone anyhow. On that we did the experiment was designed, but we also had some survey questions on it. And it was kind of this, we had an AI condition, so we introduced AI to this team playing. And as the teams which were received an AI agent, they may have done well because the AI agent was pretty good at playing Mario. But they also had an effect of lowering the trust in the human partner, and also lowered the personal effort. I forget who mentioned that. Maybe Florenta mentioned that in her paper. But there are these possible negative effects of AI, which we find, and we shouldn't take for granted that that a high trust environment, which used to be the way you describe high performing organizations, actually would be easy to coexist with a heavy reliance on agents, having agency, which is the key thing. It's asking a lot of people, because ultimately the agents which we deal with, the bots, whatever the algorithms, have data which are coming from various places which are not transparent to us. It's not surprising. That should make us a little bit suspicious, and these are the things we're working on right now.
That's great. Yeah, so my take on this question, I think how will trust and culture impact AI adoption? I think it's way beyond the AI adoption, right? So when a company invests in this technology, you can put it in use, adopt it, but more important is the usage, the utilization of this new technology. So to get that used across the departments, within the organization, or even, between the headquarters and the sub office all over the world, I think that utilization is very critical for the success of AI. And for that, culture matter really a lot, right? So in our application, we demonstrate that the AI technology is great, but it cannot really help this transaction manager that much in motivating the employees getting higher performance. Well, why? Well, it is part of the culture that transaction manager do not play emphasis on, which is build the interpersonal relationship between the employee and the manager. The transaction manager says, hey, John, Mike, you need to do your job well. That's pretty much it, right? But On the other hand, we show that if the transformational manager, they build the trust, the respect, garner more admiration from these subordinates, and because they trust the source of this manager, when they give this coaching feedback, then listen, they learn, and that's why the performance is way better. So I think there's another question from the audience. I answered that partially. So our implication, this study is trying to say AI can do a little bit better job than the human managers in terms of those transactional part of managers. But the AI is short of something else, which is a social skill. But that's exactly like one of the speakers we mentioned today's AI, the bot in our context, a chat bot is a machine. They do not have socialization, build a trust with with Bruce. It just do the task. Whatever task you give me to do, I learn the data. I pick up the best algorithm, maybe deep reinforcement learning, the AlphaGo stuff, and I dynamic learn, right? So, but that's the task, simple task. It's not about this 360-degree examine my employees, the long-term strategic career development, how to, take a heart, your mind and your soul into your subordinates. Oh, this is the best way for you to develop in the future, right? AI boss will not do that. So that's a transformation that leaders can do that. However, these transformational leaders, they can utilize the AI to do this transactional stuff, right? Those what we call it more concrete, lower order stuff. But I want these transformation leaders to build the social skill, which they are complementing with each other. AI short of social skill, but transformation leaders have stronger components of that. So they complement to a larger degree. So yes, so in brief, the trust culture is really important, not only just for adoption, but for long-term utilization and success, both the employees and the organizations in the long term.
Thank you. I'll read one last question from the audience. If you have a quick answer, any of you. So this is by JC. On the subject of theory and empirics first research, it seems that top organizations and management journals are very focused on strong theoretical contributions, particularly integration into existing theory. How should early career researchers balance an interest in AI with this academic norm?
You all have my take on that, so it'd be great to, Bruce, it'd be great to get your take.
Thanks, Rob. So generous of you, because I do have actually some outrageous things to say about this, but I'll say it quickly because we are short on time. I agree with that, the implication of that comment very very strongly, and I also would like to endorse what Florenza said. I think it's good to be doing empirics now as best as we possibly can. These studies which we heard today are amazing, but we actually don't know that much. So it would be really helpful just to open up the floodgates a little bit and let's explore this particular surface. I would even encourage us to, when we do a study on a Chinese company in China, don't assume we actually know what that means and every firm is going to be the same, in China itself and across from that. So I think we could use a combination of more, qualitative understandings, wider empirics, learning from data, in the spirit of learning from data, we can do that, as well as some of the more conventional efforts we are doing. We'll leave for next time what I think about the word theory, and I'll just turn to other people.
Does anyone have a quick addition on this? So otherwise, I'll turn it to Patrick for the conclusion.
Sounds good. So it looks like unfortunately we're out of time. But before we go, I'd like to thank our panel of expert speakers. It'd be great if all the attendees could unmute themselves and give our speakers a virtual round of applause. So we'll do that now.
Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. We also want to thank all those who attended. We're going to forward you a Dropbox folder, like we said, with papers that were presented today and other papers from these panelists. And we're looking forward to continuing this conversation in the days and months to come. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Fabrizio.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.